Morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to our fifth meeting in this 7-part series. Some quick housekeeping items. A link to the Pre-K Guidebook is provided here. You can go ahead and enter that into your web address box. If you don't already have access to it, it is also available on our early childhood website under public preschool. At the end of the meeting, a 1-hour contact certificate will be available. And if you're watching the recording later, it's also available through that. At any time, please feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions or utilize the chat box feature. You might recall there's a parking lot for questions as well. That's an anonymous space to enter questions or thoughts about anything public preschool or specifically around this 7-part series. And the link for that is provided later. I can put it in the chat box too. There won't be any scheduled breaks today, so please take care of any personal items that you might have at any time. And I failed to introduce myself. I'm Nicole Medore. I'm the Early Childhood Specialist here at the Department of Education. And I believe, hopefully Marcy will join us. Marcy is my colleague at the department. She's the Early Childhood Monitor. I know that she had some things going on this morning meeting-wise, so she might just be transitioning over. So I'll welcome her if I see her pop in. Like I said, this is a 7-part series. We're on week 5, so it's the 14th, and we're going to be chatting about family engagement. In the guidebook, this starts on page 15. And then our final 2 sessions coming up will be on the 21st and the 28th, which will include transitions and technical assistance. The other 4 that have already been covered are recorded and housed on our preschool website under professional learning and resources. Okay, so I suppose we're ready to dive right in. Let's just check here. So if you have the Pre-K Guidebook in front of you, you'll see on page 15, it talks about family engagement. And we use this term very specifically. I know a lot of folks in the early childhood world also use the term family involvement. And we're going to chat about that in a minute as well. But family engagement is very strategic on our part because we believe at the department that it's different. It's a different definition than family involvement. So in the guidebook, we adopted this definition around for family engagement, and that it means building relationships among schools, families, and communities to support learning and development. And then it goes on to talk about what some effective, sustainable engagement is. So of course, we want to be assured that any engagement strategies we use in our classrooms are culturally competent and responsive to all families. So some of our rural schools may find that, you know, the diversity in our classrooms isn't as prominent as in other areas of our state. However, cultural competence isn't just around a family's specific culture, religion, or background. It's the way that a family lives. It's the way that they conduct their household. So being aware of that and being responsive to that is really important in our classrooms. You know, we talk about being an open book, right? So what we mean is when we're interacting with families is having an understanding of how they conduct their day-to-day life with their student that's in your class. You know, what are strategies that they use to get the child to transition, to explore new experiences with the child? What are strategies that you're using in the classroom that you can share with them? Another sustainable engagement strategy is around shared responsibility of schools, families, and communities. And we'll chat more about this in a few moments as well. But basically breaking this down to, it's all of these people's responsibility to educate the child. It's not just yours as the teacher or yours as the school. It's also the families, and it's also the community in which you live. It's continuous from birth throughout adulthood. So we have a little snippet of time in this child's life, in this family's life. So we want to be sure that we're being aware of and privy to what already happened in the child's life and goal setting for where they're going to go throughout the next years of their school. Family engagement happens in home, in early care and education settings, in schools and communities, and it operates with capacity and partnerships. So family involvement versus family engagement. They're very different, and I sort of want to break it down and then just answer any questions or chat about any conversations that this might spark for folks. So when we talk about involvement, we think of it as implying doing to, versus when we talk about engagement, we think of it as implying doing with. And there's a place for both of these in the public pre-K setting, right? Or in a child care setting. There's always a time for involvement and there's always a time for engagement. So it's not that one trumps the other or do this, not that. It's a way of thinking of a strategy and building on it to be more engaging for the family's sake. So involvement as implying doing to, we're thinking of it as telling or asking parents and caregivers how they can contribute. So maybe there's a project that they can contribute to. Maybe there's some needs in the classroom like materials, volunteers, etc., that you put out a list and ask parents to contribute to. Maybe there's goals for the student, right? So during conferences, you might sit down with the parent or the caregiver and talk about what is your goal for that student's development throughout the course of time, what's the school's goal for all student development, etc. So in these scenarios, families feel like helpers, right? They sort of follow the teacher's directions and suggestions. There's not much giving in terms of educational giving on the family's part. It's more around them helping to provide for your needs in the classroom. When we boost that into thinking of engagement as doing with, now we're collaborating with the families, right? We're relating to the family of each child, okay? So involvement is perhaps information or needs that go out to all. Engagement is very individualized, okay? So here we're talking about reciprocal relationships that give and take, and that is going to be different for every family that has a child in your classroom. Some families are going to be much more open to building a relationship with you as their educator, and other families might be more standoffish or reluctant, and that's okay. That's just part of the process of communicating with them. Families are going to be involved in decision-making and goal setting. So instead of sitting down with the parent, talking about them in terms of the development or any concerns or strengths that you see of their child in your classroom, that's well and good. But now involving them in the goal setting, what do you hope to see for your child? How can I help you meet that goal? Here's my goal for your child. How can you help me reach that goal, right? And having that real, clear, open communication, individualized per student, per family. Two-way communication. So it's not just you, the teacher, reaching out to the family. It's also the family reaching out to you, the teacher, right? So it's not just about calling home with a concern. It's not just about sending a newsletter every Friday for all families. That's involvement. That's important. But the two-way communication is a give and take. And it doesn't always have to be, of course, around concerns. It should also include strengths, any new learning that you've noticed or any exciting news about their child individually. Engagement involves home and community. So it's not just school and home. It also involves any other experiences that that child might experience outside of school and outside of home, right? Any clubs, any sports, any parks or play dates, things like that. Participation and advocacy efforts. So this is where some families, this is, again, going to be really individualized and probably not the not the majority of families in your classroom, but many will participate in advocacy efforts for you, the teacher, for the school, for the district, etc. Engaging families is comprehensive and inclusive. So in this scenario, families are equal partners in their child's education. And the commitment from families in this is going to vary, right? You're not going to have a full classroom full of families who are fully engaged on all these levels. It's going to sort of ebb and flow and change year to year. I'm just going to pause there for a moment and allow folks to ask any questions or any clarifying conversations.
I think one thing I would add is just, as Nicole just said, not all families are going to be engaged equally, and some families may not be engaged at all. And it's very important to continue to try to engage those families, because it may be a work schedule thing, it may be, 100 different things, but just continuing throughout the year to try to engage those families, even if it's difficult. It's very, very important, and lets them know that that they are important in the classroom as well.
Hi, Marcy.
Hi. Sorry, my eight.
And I wanted you sparked my thought too. In the guidebook, this section of family engagement is there because it's a high quality piece to operating an early education setting. Okay, it's not that it's a requirement in chapter 124. 124's program standards does include family involvement, in that we're asking that teachers hold at least 2 or offer at least 2 parent-teacher conferences over the course of the school year, which is pretty status quo across all grades, I would say. Certainly it might look different in middle school and high school, but certainly through K-5, teachers and schools are operating parent-teacher conferences. This year looked a little different. It may have even been more successful in that we gave families an opportunity to join remotely and took away some barriers that may exist for coming in person. So that is an expectation, that 2 conferences a year, right? And we encourage folks to keep those strengths-based, and especially in the pre-K level, to talk about what you're seeing in the classroom, how, what growth you've seen for that particular child, where the child's going next, what you're going to do to support that child in their continued growth and development. And of course, if you have any concerns, hopefully the parent-teacher conference isn't the first time that parent is hearing of any potential concerns. Those conversations should be happening as soon as something arises. So there's the requirement there. But this guidebook, the way it's written, it's sort of a way to go above and beyond what is common across the nation. And we know that family involvement strategies exist, and now we're just pushing a little and stretching some thinking to say, now what? What else could we do to truly engage the families that we work with beyond involving them? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So in the guidebook, there's this visual. It's around impact strategies. So we talk about low impact, moderate impact, and high impact. And I think these 4 examples are pretty common. They're certainly ones that Marcy and I see on a regular basis when we're in classrooms and in our experience in early childhood settings. But I do want to open it up to offer some other ideas. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just reiterate some of the ones that are here. So a low impact strategy, it would be conducive to a family involvement strategy, right? So it's important, it needs to exist, but then we're going to talk about how we could boost that strategy to be more engaging. So I think a common strategy would be here, the second one perhaps. Back to school nights, open house nights, when families visit classrooms, meet teachers, and have refreshments. Why is this considered in the guidebook a low impact strategy? I'm going to open that up. You can unmute or use the chat box. Why is back to school night a low impact strategy? about 30 more seconds for folks in the chat if that's happening. Okay, so Tracy said in the chat box that back to school night, family visits classrooms, meets teachers, and has refreshments is just a snapshot of your classroom. Kelly said it's for all families, not necessarily individualized. Yeah, give about 10 more seconds. Cheryl mentioned that it's not necessarily give and take, it's more one-sided. Okay. So I would agree with all three of those. This strategy is common. It's an important transition strategy. It happens all over the place, especially at the beginning of the school year. But it's a low impact strategy for those exact reasons, because it's not a give and take, right? It's a come, see, meet, visit. It's not a time for the teacher to really engage with the family and perhaps learn more about their structure as a family and how you can utilize that structure in your classroom and what strategies you might have to offer to them, right? But taking that example and bumping it up a notch to a moderate impact strategy when during family night, families visit classrooms, meet teachers, okay, still the same, view children's work. They might have an opportunity to sign up to volunteer. They might receive a family phone tree compiled by staff. So in this scenario, we've taken a low impact and we've added to it, right? It's still, as it sits, still a sort of an open house, a family night, but now we're giving families more ways to be engaged and involved in the classroom. So here, families might have an opportunity to sign up to volunteer. The teacher might even be there encouraging families to volunteer and explaining ways in how they can volunteer, right? Maybe that's for your specific classroom, maybe it's for the school, maybe it's for, a pre-K split, anything. And there might also be a way for families to have more communication with you. So we've bumped it up a notch. Taking this strategy and moving it into a high impact strategy. So now families are sharing family engagement strategies with new families in familiar neighborhood settings and sign them up for things like what's exampled here. So here I would argue that perhaps students aren't even present, right? Perhaps this is an opportunity where they can bring their student if needed, but it's really a time for the teacher and the families to come and sit and chat and learn about what the ins and outs of the school, the ins and outs of the community, of the classroom, etc. You might have short videos of families sharing or sent with text or emails. You might have expanded ways of communication with them. You might have more sign-up sheets, surveys attached, etc. And here is where the teacher is really explicitly showing, explaining, sharing information with family, right? And gaining information from the family, I would argue too. So there's some other examples here, and I'll leave them up for just a few more minutes, but I'm really curious if there's a family involvement, or now that we've sort of looked at involvement versus engagement really briefly, if there's another example that somebody here might be willing to offer that they do, that we could chat about whether or not it's a low, moderate, or high strategy, and wherever it falls, see what we could add to it to make it more engaging. What's something else that folks are doing?
I'm just going to talk instead of the chat, if that's all right, because it's a lot to type. I think one thing that I used a lot last year, especially given the strange year that we had, was Zoom calls with parents just to find out more about what is happening at home, like what activities does the child really like, what keeps them engaged, what do they do when they're not engaged. learning more about how parents respond to behaviors, what behaviors they see, that kind of stuff. So I think really empowering the parent as the expert on the child helped to build relationships, especially in a year where we didn't have a lot of face-to-face time and a lot of share time.
Mhm.
That's what I use. And I found it to be even more helpful with some of our culturally and linguistically diverse families that have different child rearing practices and expectations. So
Right.
that was a helpful piece.
So Kelly, would you consider that on this chart like a low, moderate, or high impact strategy?
I think it would be on the high impact side because it
Okay.
was really
And
individualized.
yep, you just took the words right out of my mouth.
I feel like
Right. So that's a one-on-one conversation, one-on-one engagement strategy with families that is asking about their specific dynamics of their family, right? Of their child.
Yeah. And then I tried to bridge it, right? So like asking them to support me and how I would manage that behavior in my setting. So what works for you at home so I can try it here.
Right.
And I felt like with some of the more challenging situations that were happening, that was a really great way to kind of build that respect with them and not sort of just be reporting challenges, right? I was asking for their support and how to manage the challenges that were happening.
Right. And you said something too, Kelly, that we say, and I agree with all the time, which is families are the experts on their child. So I 100% agree with that. As a mom myself, I feel like I know my child and her or his personality, learning styles, etc. With that said, I also always like to throw in a wrench to that saying and say that we as educators are also experts on young learners. And a family, a parent, although they know their child, may not necessarily know or understand the growth and development sort of scope and sequence of their child's learning. They may not know or have confidence in whether it's appropriate discipline strategies or appropriate ways to have their child engage or peer interaction, right? So we're both experts. We're both coming at this work in a different light and able to offer different information. So while we should always turn to the family for exactly what you were saying, right? So talking with them individually around what works for you, what are you seeing, what are your child's strengths, concerns, etc. Here are mine. We should always be doing that. We should also always be prepared to offer assistance to the family if and when they seem to need it, right? So if a child all of a sudden is experiencing difficulty in the classroom, and you reach out to the family and you say, I have some concerns, this is what I'm seeing, are you seeing this at home? And they say yes, I'm at my wit's end, I don't know what to do, I'm stuck, I just let them do it. It's easier than perhaps putting in a discipline and having a tantrum or something like that, right? So then there's this give and take of, okay, we're both experiencing something, you're at your wit's end, I'm seeing this as a difficulty in the classroom and it's affecting, the rest of the kids in my class, but I might have more strategies and outreach and resources available to help the student and the family. I have access to guidance counselors. I have access to administrators. I have access to special education experts, right? So don't ever think that just because we know families are experts, we're experts too, right? Don't shy away from your own knowledge and your access to resources that families might not even know exist. So that's part of that engagement and those high impact strategies of getting to know individually and how and when to communicate with them. So I wanted to hop back to the back to school night and it being a low impact strategy. I think another reason why it falls in that category is because not all families attend back to school night, right? There's could be a number of barriers in the way. Maybe they didn't get the notice in time. Maybe they work evening shifts and they don't have availability in the evenings to visit the school. Maybe they don't have transportation, so they can't physically get there. Maybe they don't have childcare, so they would have to bring their child, but they don't have a car seat. Who knows, right? It could be anything. So a low impact strategies, like I think Kelly said in the chat box, it's offered to all families, but all families might not be able to access it, right? So even though you're encouraging it, doesn't mean it's going to work for all. So bumping that up to a moderate or bumping that up to a high impact engagement strategy is where the individualization comes in, the relationship with the family comes in, so that you can better meet their needs. So back to school night, you're hoping to introduce them to the classroom, show them where you sit for whole group circle, show them where they go for block center, whatever it might be. Family can't get there, so you offer to do a Zoom call with them, right? And then maybe you tour the classroom that way. Maybe there's a language barrier, so you have to offer some type of interpretation service so that that parent and that family can feel fully involved in what you're sharing, right? So those types of things are what bump it up to be more individualized, more engaging, and more successful for building a relationship with those families. Because if we don't offer those things, then that family is very likely going to feel left out perhaps for the whole school year, right? Or my child's classroom keeps offering all these wonderful things, but I can't access them for XYZ reasons. There's no other accommodations to do that. So we're just never going to be able to visit or to do any of the events that come up. The other thing I'll throw out there too is that parents of our students may not have had a positive experience in school themselves. And physically going back to a school could cause really great anxiety and stress for them, right? Depending on their own experience as a student. And now here they are a parent and they have a student in school and the school's constantly reaching out saying, come to me, come to me, come to me. And they're saying, whoa, pump the brakes. I don't like school, right? This brings up some really negative feelings in me and I'm just not going to be that parent, right? So we don't want to allow that to just be the end all be all, right? There's got to be other ways that we can still engage with that family without it being physically at the school or physically in the classroom, right? It might be a Zoom, it might be a home visit. It might be meeting with them somewhere in the community, a local McDonald's, a local park, a Dunkin' Donuts. Hey, come grab a coffee with me and let's chat about Nicole's transition into school so far, right? Like I'd love to buy you, your favorite latte and just have a chat, right? And that may or may not help, but what a great way to show that you're in this together and that you're an expert in some ways, they're an expert in some ways, and you need to morph those in the interest of the child. I'm getting off on my soapbox. Any other questions around that?
I just put in the chat, Nicole, to add to your soapbox. That is also really important to consider those things when we think about special education or ELL services, because, when you think about parents and the systems 20 years ago, right, they look very different. So not everyone has had a positive experience. So to kind of take that perspective in when you have those conversations.
Right. And especially thinking about special education services as a whole nother agency for 3 to 5 year olds, right? It's not in the school right now. It's a whole nother bucket of people, of terms, of vocabulary, of dates, of schedules, of languages. It's a whole nother added piece to school that many parents and families may not have experience with and may feel very just turned off by, right? And just for the sheer reason of not understanding the process. So it's really in our due diligence to explain the ins and the outs of who is who, what is what, and really advocating and supporting those families in IEP meetings, in scheduling purposes, and for anything like that. We want to be there as their partner, as their friend in it, and not always as the I'm right, you're wrong, your child needs this, do it now, right? We want to make sure that we bridge those two worlds and help that transition for the family as much as for the child. I was going to say, I forgot what it was. I remember. So hopefully I mean, we're going to keep chatting, but hopefully this table and this conversation sort of stretches your own thinking and inspires you moving into the next school year around how to better accommodate and meet and engage with families beyond just involving them. Okay, I had put in this short video. I think we'll have time, just in case if we had time. If not, I was going to give you the link, but it's a short 5-minute video that I wanted to go ahead and share with folks. So just bear with me while I get it set up, because it's going to open in a new doc. Video. Is it still spinning on your end, Marcy?
Yes. Well, it's frozen, I think, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Best laid plan.
Watching videos on Zoom is always hit or miss.
Okay, looks like it's starting to come. Oh,
Yep, it looks like it is.
As we work to help every child succeed.
Do you may want to, there we go. I was like, the picture wasn't up, so we may want to pause it and let it sort of, I forget what the term is.
I'm going to turn off my video too to help see if it helps.
Is it on play right now?
I don't know, it's just
It's
buffering them.
yeah. I see it now.
Okay, it's getting better. Hold on. Better. Just not. All right, I'm going to play and see if it catches up.
And to close gaps in student achievement, we often assume school is the main place that learning is going to happen. Take Esma. It used to seem to her family and her educators that Esma is always at school. Not true, it turns out. Esma and other students actually spend 82% of their waking hours at home or in their community. All those weekends, weeknights, and breaks add up. When they realized that, the educators in Esma's school district decided to work harder on making the most of the biggest partner in her learning life, her family. This can look different in every school, but for Esma's teacher, it means instead of spending his time arranging a traditional open house, he organizes grade-level parent meetings. Here, Esma's family saw data on how the class is doing in math, reading, social and emotional learning. They practiced new ways to help Esma at home, and set goals for how they'll help her improve. Everyone learned from each other as the group talked about how to help the students. Also, near the start of the school year, some staff from Esma's school visited her home. They looked for the assets her family members can bring to the educational process. They learned about their languages, their culture, their lives, their world. Grandpa offered to be a resource for other English learner families, and the school also listened and learned from the family's perspective on Esma's needs. They learned how Mom helps her calm down and focus. This kind of family engagement also makes it easier for the district to develop individualized education programs for students, including those in special education. The foundation is already there for families to engage in their students' academic and career planning too, making that more effective. Throughout the year, the family can attend workshops at the school on things like mental health, homework, or career exploration. Esma's mom saw those meetings on a poster in her work break room, and now she's inviting other parent friends to go with her. Esma's school district works with local businesses, places of worship, the public library, and other partners to reach students and families where they're already spending time. The school provides information frequently in a variety of ways so they can reach every family. Text messages are offered in the most common languages of local families. Esma's family gets photos from her teacher so they know what she's doing during the day. Communication between the school and the family is a group effort focused on helping Esma achieve her learning goals. When Esma wasn't sure what to do on a science assignment, her family knew to contact the teacher for a little clarification. Educators take a positive approach as they look for solutions to any challenges experienced on either side. They're always looking for the family's strengths. Also, when mom mentions that Esma has trouble making friends, the teacher knows to refer her to the school counselor. The counselor then helps the family join a local Boys and Girls Club with lots of activities for Esma. The teacher knew to do this because the school counselor led staff trainings on resources available in the community and how to help families access them. There's no danger of a family like Esma's ever feeling like an occasional onlooker. The school knows what families have to offer, and the family knows what's going on in the classroom and how to support it. They feel they are active and regular collaborators and decision makers. The district gives families opportunities to learn how to help children succeed at each level of the school system and to serve on school groups. At school gatherings, Esma's adult stepsister and close next-door neighbor also feel included in the community. Staff at the school are trained to be as inclusive as possible, welcoming as learning partners anyone who cares about the child. Esma's school has moved from parent involvement to family engagement. Not surprisingly, engaged families help students learn better. Staff members like their jobs better. Everyone wins. This is backed up by over 40 years of research. Students with engaged families, no matter their income, background, or culture, are more likely to do well in school, enroll in ambitious courses, graduate, and go on to post-secondary education. They also have stronger social skills and fewer disciplinary issues. So how do we make it happen? First, we work to make the shift across an entire school district. Sure, at the elementary level, Esma's classroom teacher is the main person her family interacts with at school, but as she gets older and her schooling more complex, collaboration is definitely bigger than one person. Really, all along the way, the family's interactions with pretty much everyone in connection with the school, from office staff to after-school staff, from bus drivers to principals, will need to be positive for them to truly feel welcomed. So it's a clear expectation in the district. Every employee has a role in helping every family feel connected to their child's learning, no matter what building or classroom that child attends. In Esma's district, a broad team that included school psychologists, social workers, counselors, families, general and special educators, and after-school program staff helped everyone in the school take family engagement to this next level in a way that works for their community. It worked. Esma's family feels like a valued member of the team. Esma, her family, and her educators feel confident that she is learning and happy at school. We have more information about how schools and families can effectively engage with each other around students' learning on our website.
The audio went longer than the video on that. So any sort of reactions to that at the moment while I just get this back up? Any like aha moments or thoughts, considerations before I move us on? Okay, so I'm going to move us forward then. And in keeping that video and some of our conversation that we've had so far this morning in mind, I wanted to share this other strategy. I actually learned of this in a professional learning opportunity that I took part in as an attendee. And I really, really liked the way that the presenters sort of broke down family engagement and sort of mirrored it with an MTSS framework. So MTSS is our multi-tiered systems of support. We talked about this in a prior guidebook session here. this framework is not just for family engagement in any way. It's actually for student support. But the way that MTSS framework works in a tiered, leveled approach, we could also apply that to assess and improve our own family engagement efforts. So just like MTSS framework for students, we start at tier 1, right, which is down at the bottom. It's the foundation. It's what's universally available for everyone. So when we talk about family engagement, the tier 1 is going to be your universal school-wide support system for all families. So it establishes the school culture, communicates expectations, behavior and learning, and its effective universal support should meet the needs of most families. So any strategy that you have for family engagement, it's going to be universal and offered at the very most to all. So an example for this might be, say, a student handbook, right? So that might be something that you offer for your classroom, and you give it to all families as a typed document, okay? However, you know that a typed document, like a handbook or a newsletter, might not meet the needs or interests of all your families. So out of your 16 students, maybe you know of 4 families who aren't going to easily access that handbook. Maybe it's a language barrier, maybe it's a reading barrier, maybe it's just that handbook physically didn't make it home to the parent. So here, you could add on another layer. So in the MTSS framework, next comes tier 2, which is a responsive layer. It's in response to a specific need. So those 4 families that you know of who are not able to access a student handbook will need to be responded to in a different way, right? So you're still going to give them the handbook. Your tier 1 is still there, but now you're adding support that are programs or strategies for those who need the additional support. So let's say that your student handbook is written in English and you offer it to every single family, and 4 families in your classroom do not speak English or maybe do not read English. So now you're going to have to offer them the handbook, but add a layer of support. So what might that layer of support be? Okay, so in the chat box, there's a response that may be that second tier, that you meet and talk through the handbook to increase understanding or offer language access support if needed. Okay, so let's go with the language access support if needed. So those 4 families do not speak English, so you have the handbook translated into their individual languages, which could be 4 separate languages, right? Which is fine. So, okay, so great. Offered the handbook, tier 1. For 4 families, you were responsive in making it more accessible to them by having it translated into their language. Great. But 1 family still is having trouble understanding the handbook. So perhaps it didn't translate exactly. Perhaps they have concerns with reading level. So now you have to add a 3rd layer. So that 3rd layer is going to be added on top of what you've already done. You've given the handbook, you've translated it, but now this 1 family is still struggling to access what's in the handbook. So now what? Now what is going to be your intense or individualized strategy to support the need of that specific family? So this might be an area, I'm just not seeing anything come in the chat, so I'm going to hop in. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I was going to. Right. So in the chat box, I believe, yep, Kelly said that she would meet with them and discuss examples of what specific areas might look like so they have context. And Melissa said a meeting to explain. Exactly. So that's exactly where my mind was going as well. So instead of just providing a handbook, translating it in their language, now you're also meeting with that family, maybe with a translator if needed, and going through section by section to really unpack and better explain what each section is referring to and how that looks in your classroom. So now you've taken a family involvement strategy of a handbook, and you've added layers to it, similar to an MTSS framework, to truly engage a family. And that engagement strategy wasn't necessary for all families, but it was necessary for some, and it was necessary really for potentially one. So let's think of it again in another example. So what's another tier 1 universal support for all families? I'll take anything at this chat box or unmute. Maybe it's something that you do every year for all families. What's an example of that? I'll give it about 10 more seconds and then I'll throw in an example to go through. Okay, so I think one thing we can all relate to in transitioning back to a new school year, especially in pre-K, is the need child find law to screen all incoming students, right? This is necessary for incoming pre-K students. It's also necessary for incoming kindergarten students who have not had public pre-K experience in your school. So, tier 1 support for all families. You send information out to your community through newsletter, through Facebook posts, through website acknowledgments that you're currently now scheduling for incoming students in your pre-K classroom to be screened. And you, the teacher, have a list of 16 students coming in who all need to have a developmental screener per child find laws. So tier 1, okay, universal. You make that announcement available to the public. Like I said, newsletters, websites, posts on Facebook or social media, posts outside the school on the sign, etc. All families have access to that, okay? From the results of doing that, you have 10 students scheduled for screening. So great, out of 16, 10 got the message, 10 followed through, good to go. 6 families are still not scheduled. So now what? Now we're bumping up to tier 2. We've given them notice, 10 have signed up, 6 need more response. So what might we do in a tier 2 to improve tier 1 strategy? Okay, so I have 3 similar responses in the chat box, which is to call them, reach out, right? Now you have 6 families. You likely have their contact information, give them a call. So let's say we did that. We call our 6 families. As a result of that, 4 families of them are now added to our schedule. So out of 16 students, we now have 14 signed up and ready to be screened for incoming pre-K. But that still leaves 2 families who haven't scheduled and haven't answered their phone. So we're bumping up to tier 3 now. We've provided community information. We've made individual phone calls. 2 families are still not responding. So we add a 3rd layer and more intense outreach. What might be a tier 3 outreach to engage these families in screening? Okay, so 3 responses in the chat box. Face-to-face conversation at pickup or drop-off if possible. That's assuming if the school year started. I think maybe another phone call or an email explaining that if you don't hear from them, then you're going to stop by or visit and then do so. Make an appointment. Okay, so yeah, that for those lingering 2 families that haven't scheduled their screening yet, any one of those could be a tier 3 support. You might need to offer a home visit to screen their children, right? Because it may be that they don't have access to a phone to get your message, or it may be that they don't have transportation to get to the school or the location where you're providing screening. So you might have to take the screening to them, to those 2 families. You might need to offer an additional time outside of what you have set for schedules. Maybe your scheduling is on Mondays and Tuesdays, right? But the family can't access the school on Mondays and Tuesdays because of jobs. But they could come on a Friday during lunch. So maybe for those 2 families, you offer a time outside of what was planned to accommodate their needs. Okay, so again, you've engaged all your families in different ways, right? You've added layers. You've gone above and beyond just a typical outreach to truly engage and inform all your families and individual families. Okay. So I hope that process was helpful. And the final thing in the guidebook that is on page 15 is questions to consider when you're thinking about family engagement. So of course, I believe there's 8 questions there. So when a family or a community member enters your school, is the environment welcoming? So think about your classroom and think about your school and what parents and families are seeing as they enter it. Okay, what's the message that's being sent there? I've been to schools where they have signs right in the entryway that tell the parent some cutesy little rhyme around, basically, we'll take it from here, right? Like, leave your child here, we'll take it from here. And it really is discouraging families from entering the school beyond the entryway. Is that the message we want to be sending? I know that there's really strict safety concerns for having other adults in the school that aren't staff or aren't approved to be there. I get that. But are there ways that we could get around that so that the messaging isn't, you can't come here, but maybe it's more of a, ways to meet and welcome them into the space in a more home environment, welcoming way. Is there signage indicating a family's right to interpretation or translation and instructions for accessing those services, right? So being sure that we're being inclusive of all families and their needs. Are all staff trained in communicating with culturally and linguistically diverse families? So you, the teacher, are likely not the only person interacting with these families, right? Usually the school secretary, the school nurse, maybe a guidance counselor, maybe the gym teacher, maybe the lunch coordinator. All of those staff people have reason to communicate and interact with families. So are they all trained to work with and interact with culturally and linguistically diverse families? When a family or community member enters your school, are they greeted with a smile and asked how they can be helped? So a lot of schools now have, like I said, security features. So they often have to identify themselves and show identification before they're allowed to enter the school. But what does that process look like, right? What does that look like for somebody coming in the school? Who are they meeting and how are they greeted? Do your families know who they can ask for questions related to their child, related to maybe meals, maybe for a function of a school or bus ride? So who are the outreach for each of these people, each of these pieces? Maybe it's you, maybe they come to the teacher first, and that's fantastic. But giving and providing contact information will be important. Is there a platform that teachers use to communicate? And does it expand across all grades? Or does a parent need to learn a new technique each year? So this COVID year is a great example of that, because we had a lot of remote outreach for families. Some of that was through apps, some of that used Zoom, some used Google Meet. There's a plethora of technology used. And was that the same across grades? Or, to the point of this question in number 6, are parents forced to use Google Meet for this child, Zoom for this child, Seesaw for this child, etc.? So trying to eliminate confusion and provide consistency across grades is really important. How often are teachers and leaders reaching out to individual parents? And is it only when there's concerns or when something amazing happens? So we mentioned this earlier, right? Not just waiting for conferences to talk about a child, but reaching out prior to, especially with any concerns you might have, but also especially with any strengths or strides made in the classroom that you really want to brag about, right? What parent doesn't want to hear how well their child is doing? And then finally, oops, I can't really see that because my screen is in the way. How are families engaged in the process of transition? How are families engaged in the transition process into preschool and kindergarten? And that's really the topic of our time together next Wednesday. So we will chat more about that. But the transition process into school and across grades is a really important one for us to be engaging families in, not just involving them, but truly engaging them. Okay, I'm going to allow time for questions. This link at the top, it will bring you right to our parking lot. And I'm going to exit this just for a moment.
You did. Kelly just wrote in the chat room that there's a great platform that sends text to parents in their home language and allows them to text back in their home language and translate to you. And that she's put the link to that tool in the chat. So if anybody's interested, that is there.
Thank you, Kelly.
And also,
Okay, so I'm going to keep questions on. I'm just going to pull up this 1-hour certificate for those that are ready to access that.